Hi, my name is Zoila Alvarez Hernández, and I'm an immigrant rights attorney here at the ACLU of New Mexico. I will be facilitating our panel conversation today. Thank you all for joining us. We want to thank our partners, the ACLU of Arizona, the ACLU of San Diego and Imperial counties, and the UNM School of Law Law Student Chapter of the ACLU, and the Immigration Law Student Association. Today, we have invited a fantastic group of panelists to be here with us today. First, we have Mitra Ebadolahi, and she is a senior staff attorney. From 2011 to 2013, Mitra was an inaugural Nadine Strossen Fellow with the ACLU's National Security Project in New York. In 2013, she joined the ACLU of San Diego and Imperial counties as a border litigation project, a staff attorney. She is now a senior staff attorney and an expert in constitutional and administrative law and litigation, particularly in the areas of immigrant rights and border justice. She holds degrees from NYU School of Law, the London School of Economics, and the University of California, Los Angeles. Here today, we also have Jenn Budd, former Border Patrol agent and an immigrant rights advocate. Jenn was a senior patrol agent with the US Border Patrol in San Diego and an intelligence agent at the San Diego sector headquarters. She resigned in protest in 2001 after whistleblowing on senior management being involved in narcotics smuggling. The agency gave her a choice to accept a promotion and stay quiet or resign. Since leaving the agency due to rampant corruption and the Border Patrol's culture of impunity, she has become an immigrant rights activist. Also here we have Jorge Rodriguez, a former ACLU-NM organizer, a border resident, and a current UNM School of Law student. Jorge is originally from Salem, a small colonia in southern New Mexico. His passion for border and immigrant justice stems from lived experiences as a border resident and a farm worker. He has an undergraduate and a master's degree from the from New Mexico State University, and is currently in his third year at the University School of Law. He's finally a Lobo. In between graduate school and law school, he was an organizer for the ACLU of New Mexico. Additionally, we have Yvette Borja with us. She is a border litigation attorney at the ACLU of Arizona. Yvette is a border litigation attorney at the she is from the Bay Area originally and a daughter of Salvadorian asylum seekers who fled the Civil War in the 1980s. Yvette graduated in 2018 from Stanford Law School and worked on the adult detention team at the Florence Immigrant and Refugee Rights Project, helping pro se respondents in their deportation proceedings in Southern Arizona. She is the co-founder of the Cerebronas podcast and a founder of Radio Cachimbona. Additionally, with us today, we have the filmmaker of the film Undeterred. Eva is an independent media maker based in Southern Arizona, and as a creator, she has been featured on PBS, Counterpunch, and Truth Out, among other outlets. Since 2013, she has been based in Arivaca, Arizona, a community on the US southern border where she documented local struggles to provide crisis relief and organized for border demilitarization. Thank you so much all for being here. We really appreciate your time and your expertise. Same with the audience. Thank you for making time to watch the film and join us for this panel discussion. So, Eva, you made this Undeterred, and actually, Eva, let me make sure, is it Ava or Eva?
Eva, but Ava's fine too.
Eva, you made the Undeterred film in 2018. Its focus is on a small town in Arivaca, Arizona, which is just 11 miles north of the US-Mexico border. There, a temporary Border Patrol checkpoint went up about 10 years ago now. Is that still present today?
No, actually, they just removed both checkpoints. So there's a checkpoint on both roads in and out of town, and they just were removed this past July, which is a huge victory for the community, and it's a really big deal. So we're very, very happy. Yeah.
So tell us, what inspired you to make the film?
Well, I moved out to Arivaca in 2013, and people were starting to organize around removing the checkpoint. And I was really inspired by the organizing that people were doing and started filming it. And then the film just kind of grew out of there. But the idea for the film is really because I'm originally from the Northeast. And before I came to the border region, I really had no idea um, what what a war zone it truly is in terms of the way our government um, interacts, and like the surveillance state, the militarized nature of things, the fact that there's this militarized armed force that's pursuing people, and people are literally dying in the thousands. And I just really had no understanding of that reality or how it functioned or why it functioned before I came out here. So a lot of, for me, Undeterred was about trying to translate that reality and that experience of living here, and for people who might not be familiar with it. And also create a tool that people who are familiar with it can use, and to share that sort of how inspired I felt by the people who were organizing to push back against that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. In the film, the Arivaca community shared that every day of their lives, every time they left the town for any reason, they had to go through a border patrol checkpoint. And then the film, that's sort of how the campaign to remove the checkpoint began, right? Jorge, you grew up in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and often had to pass through checkpoints to do everyday activities like shop, visit family, or go to the movie theater. What was that like?
Yeah, the film really touched me. It felt like I was like reliving just I guess my childhood growing up. Um yeah, I think um the film actually just helped me realize that growing up in the region, I actually like normalized this, and I didn't realize that this wasn't normal. And so I think that's what kind of really um I guess I don't know, got me questioning why they were there, right? Like, kind of like what the film talks about. But I think, yeah, just growing up near the checkpoints, the reality of you whether you want to or not, you're always aware of what you're wearing, how you're talking. You become conditioned into, you start realizing what these agents view as suspect or subject in the region. So the way you respond, the way what type of books are showing in your car, what are you wearing, how are you sitting, your posture, yes so no sir kind of thing, um, yeah, you really start being conditioned to police yourself in a way, because in reality, you just want to limit the interaction with these federal agents. Um, so
Have you had interactions with Border Patrol that made you fearful? Can you share any of them?
yeah, so that's kind of why I'm here too in law school. So growing up, I actually had an internship with the ACLU in New Mexico, and I started learning about my rights. And so I was like, oh, I have rights. Why not? I'm gonna exercise my rights. So it wasn't until one time I was traveling from a movie with my little cousin, and we were coming back home. It was one evening, and for whatever reason, the agent just started questioning us, and I was being polite. However, the question just kind of exceeded to our what our citizenship status was, or our immigration status, and it just started continuing to like, what's in your car, what's in this bag, where are you coming from, and then I remember telling the agent, I was like, excuse me, it's like, I'm not trying to be rude. I'm trying to be respectful, but I want to exercise my rights, and I don't want to continue asking these questions. I was like, I'm a U.S. citizen, and am I free to go? And if I'm not, can I have a reason why? And that kind of just got everything going, right? So, got put into secondary, and next thing I realized, the car my cousin and I were driving, we were surrounded by federal agents, and you can see their posture just became really aggressive. They had like their hands in their holsters, their weapons. And growing up in the border region my entire life, I had never felt fear until that one time where the only thing I was doing was taking my cousin to the movies, trying to go home. I tried exercising my rights. I was being polite, and next thing I realized, I was literally I thought I was gonna like lose my life. But the thing that really got me going was that I put someone who I love in danger, literally by just trying to show them that you have rights and you can exercise your rights by being polite. And by doing that, yeah, I thought I was gonna, we were gonna be hurt or lose our lives at that point.
You were formerly an ACLU organizer before moving on to law school. In your experience, did you find that Border Patrol agents target certain people over others?
Yeah. So working with community members and just hearing people's experiences, you see this pattern of what people see as suspect in the region, right? And it's ironically, it really targets a lot of the working class people, of just individuals who just live in the border region. You consider farm workers, people who work in the fields, people who maybe English isn't their first language. But even the type of vehicles they drive. So you would hear from community members that, like, I'm not, why should I exercise my rights if that's just going to give agents like another reason to treat me like this? Like, people really just want to limit their experiences. So it kind of creates this idea of where, like, you put people's safety, um but also this idea of, like, you also have rights and you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, right? So it's this balance of how do you hold this agency accountable with knowing your rights, but also have taking into account people's safety.
I feel that very, very deeply. It is a constant struggle in my head. Yvette, um, you are a border litigation attorney at the ACLU of Arizona. How um, is how is it presently, the area in your, how militarized is the law enforcement in your area at this time?
It's incredibly militarized, and I saw somebody in the chat was asking about Eva's film being available later. It is available, and you all should definitely watch it because it sketches out the history of militarization in Arizona beautifully. I think the most important thing to understand, or one of the most important laws that militarized the border in Arizona and kind of the US-Mexico border in general, was Border Patrol's 1994 Prevention Through Deterrence Plan, which you could think of as state-sanctioned murder, because in the plan itself, they say that they will prevent people from coming because they'll be deterred from the deaths, the inevitable deaths that will occur as people try to cross in the most dangerous areas of the desert. So the border is militarized so that places where people would cross prior that were easier to cross are militarized. And so what that does for migrants who are seeking asylum, for migrants who are desperate for an opportunity for a better life, what they'll do is cross in the most, it's not, they're not going to be, they actually aren't deterred. They are undeterred. And they go through the most dangerous parts of the Arizona desert, because those are the areas that don't have the heavy drone surveillance, don't have as many agents present, don't have a border wall or fencing. And the reason that those aren't there is because the terrain is so deadly that those things aren't necessary. The terrain itself kills people. And that's what Eva was mentioning. That was her inspiration for starting the film. And yeah, the film explains it better than I can. So I'll just end it there and say you should watch the film.
Mitra, what about in San Diego? What does the militarization of the border look like in your area?
Thanks, Zoila. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of the same. So we have a lot of interior enforcement by Border Patrol throughout various parts of San Diego and Imperial counties, including in North County, where there's a lot of like avocado farms. And for instance, right after the pandemic started in March 2020, the community up in Fallbrook, which is part of North County in San Diego, was reporting a very active Border Patrol checkpoint in Temecula. And that was important because a lot of the communities around that checkpoint had to pass through the checkpoint in order to access hospitals. and medical care. And a lot of people understandably were afraid to go on those routes, which again, at a time when there was an unprecedented global pandemic and people needed access to medical care, was particularly egregious and horrifying. And then more recently, this past August in Imperial County, we are also hearing reports from community partners that because there's such limited medical care available in Imperial County, a lot of residents have to travel to places like Palm Springs or San Diego or Los Angeles in order to get medical assistance, especially if they need specialized care. And so the checkpoints, there's checkpoints on Highway 86, on I-94, on I-8. They can all impede access to necessary treatment for folks who are undocumented or mixed status families. So that's one very concrete way where this sometimes I think abstract concept of militarization can be made very real and can really have devastating impacts, not only on the individuals and families directly affected, but all of us who want to live in a humane and just and fair society.
Thank you, Mitra. Post 9/11, we have seen an increase in the militarization of the border since the inception of the Department of Homeland Security. And the film covers that border security is a new market in with an unprecedented growth period around investing and spending on US Border Patrol. It's now a huge institution that consists of 24-hour constant surveillance and people in borderland communities not having the feeling of true freedom. Jenn, you used to be a Border Patrol agent and now you're an advocate for immigrant rights. What inspired you to make the change?
What inspired me to make the change, it was in February 2015. I was having some mental health issues with some PTSD from what I endured being in the Border Patrol. You know, I was raped by a fellow agent in the academy and they covered it up, and then just trying to do what I thought was bring justice to the United States or safety to our country. And so I had a horrible suicide attempt. And I spent some time thinking about where my life had ended up and what I had done to contribute that. And I decided I needed to go and spend some time listening to migrants and listening to their trauma and the fact that I had enforced laws that had violated people's rights and were you know, born from white supremacy, and I needed to address that in my own life because that's not how I was raised. I had a college degree and intended to go to law school to become an attorney like Mitra, but did not know anything about the southern border, being from Alabama. And so I just started on this journey of a lot of years of listening to the other side and believing their stories. And that's how it started for me.
Thank you for sharing that. There are various stories of civil rights violations and human rights violations and use of force that are accounted for throughout Border Patrol. Are there any specific instances of cruelty, violence, or racism that you can share that convinced you to be done and turn in your badge?
I think that when I was an agent, just it kept feeling more and more like the people that I was sitting in the office with. You know, they call the meetings before you go out to the field of muster. And I would look around and I was more afraid of the people in green uniforms that I worked with day by day. I could look at one agent and say, yep, I know he's been charged with rape. I know this agent's been charged with drug smuggling. The bosses of the station are charged with drug smuggling, and nothing ever happens to anybody. And I was fortunate in that I worked in Campo. I didn't work in the city of San Diego. I worked in the mountains. And so whenever I apprehended a group, to have transport come, it took hours. And so I spent a lot of time speaking to the people that I was apprehending. And every day, I realized more and more that the people that I was apprehending were kinder and more humane to me than the people that I was working with. And every time that I brought them in to run their records checks, they were not criminals. They were moms and dads, brothers and sisters, and they were the victims of what I was enforcing. And so I think it was more of a collective instance or collective bunch of stories that caused me to start to really think about things and look at it in a different way.
Thank you, Jenn. Yvette, there are 450 agents when there were 450 agents when the Border Patrol first came into being in 1924. The number of agents remained pretty low, around 4,000 until 1993. Today, there are around 20,000 agents in the entire United States. ICE, Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement, was established in 2003, and today it has over 20,000 agents. Can you talk about this expansion and how this came to be?
Yeah, I think that it's really critical to understand how the discourse around the war on terror was weaponized as a reason to expand the deportation machine. And ICE itself and DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, are both post 9/11 creations, and I think continue to be fueled by xenophobic sentiment that the GOP constantly utilizes, and honestly that mainstream and liberal media also perpetuate. The media still reports the Title 42 crisis as being unprecedented surges, unprecedented waves of migrants, without giving the backstory that Title 42 is a government-created policy that has had asylum seekers languishing for years. And I think that a complete narrative shift needs to happen in order for these agencies to be defunded and abolished. The way that CBP and ICE public affairs officers talk about their agencies, you would think that they're these like scrappy fellows with no funding, and they're actually two of the best federally funded law enforcement agencies and have just ballooned at an unprecedented rate. I think like the way that we got here really is xenophobia, particularly, and anti-migrant sentiment, particularly post 9/11.
Yeah, there's a really powerful graphic in the film, right, where it sort of does this pie chart on the comparison between funding at $15.1 billion for the FBI, the DEA, ATF, US Marshals, and Secret Service. That's their budget. Whereas for ICE and Customs, just them, they have $18.9 billion, almost $4 billion more than all of those other agencies combined, which is just insane. Border Patrols, and Yvette, this is for you as well. Border Patrol's entrenched culture of abuse and inhumanity was on full display in their treatment of Haitian migrants in Del Rio, Texas in September. What are the changes that must be made to ensure that this agency does not continue to harm border communities and migrants?
I mean, the thing about Border Patrol is that it was founded on a racist premise. And the history of Border Patrol in the Caribbean is actually quite revealing, because Border Patrol was deployed on the island of Haiti, and one of its first actions as an agency was patrolling the border between Haiti and the DR. And the presence of Border Patrol in Haiti and DR actually a huge reason for anti-Blackness on the part of the DR government. And that was how the agency was founded. It was meant to enforce racist borders, anti-Black borders. And that is why we saw the image that we saw earlier a few weeks of a white man in chaps with a whip attacking Haitian asylum seekers. That there's a direct line from Border Patrol's first mission and that violent act. They've never redeemed, it's an agency that's never redeemed itself. It was founded on a rotten premise, and it's only continued to engage in violations of humanity. And there's no saving it. There's no resuscitating this agency. So it just needs to be abolished. That's the only option.
Thank you, Yvette. Eva, what are some of the interactions between community members and CBP that you documented that stand out most in your mind or that disturb you?
That's such a hard question, because I've been living in Arivaca for 8 years and I've seen a lot of violence. Jenn, your story really touched me, because I feel like it's just so consistent across the board, the violence. And it's interesting because I talked to, for the film, James Tomshek, who's also a former Border Patrol whistleblower, who talks about sort of that culture of impunity that is created and that paramilitary mentality within the force. But I've heard a lot of terrible stories. You know, there were a lot of people in Arivaca who did not want to talk on camera about their experiences with Border Patrol because they were so traumatized and they're scared. And there's a lot of fear because there is such impunity within the agency. But we've had people whose houses were literally bombed by DEA working with Border Patrol, that they literally set off like flash grenades and like injured people. I know someone in town who found a camera in the desert and was apprehended by Border Patrol and essentially kidnapped for 5 days and then released without ever being charged or seeing a judge or anything, but just detained. And all of these stories really pale in comparison to the violence that's being experienced by the people who are facing the Border Patrol agents out in the middle of the desert where there's nobody else around. And some of this is touched on in the film, just the number of people who have been straight up shot by Border Patrol agents and killed. Just all sorts of, in Arivaca, we see people who have been injured because they were chased off of a cliff by Border Patrol agents, or, all sorts of just terrible, terrible violence that's happening all the time. And so it's really, I have to agree with Yvette. It feels like this ongoing legacy of violence, and really, like, in a way, this death cult that is pretty consistently violent in their behavior and their mission, and the way that they interact.
I have a question from the audience that seems timely, so I will share it, but I want to give Jenn an opportunity to add.
I think it's important when we talk about wanting to change the language and the narrative. I think it's important to recognize that the idea of deterrence policies, and you have to remember that I became an agent in June of '95. So in Campo, we just saw the first fence starting in Tecate, and I knew the children before the fence went up that lived on the south side, and I knew. So I was fortunate to see the community without a wall, and it was different. And the thing about the Campo agents is that we actually took a lot of pride in the times when we could return people who did not survive. And when the fence came and they told us, oh, we're finding too many bodies, the fence is killing people, we were ordered to stop finding bodies. And a lot of agents, they call that the old patrol before 9/11, found that very devastating. And so I think the act of whether it's destroying water bottles or food, in just the simple policy of the United States of building walls and militarizing that pushes migrants and families to these dangerous zones, that should be spoken about in terms of violence, because it is killing them. And nobody cares, except for us and the people who have family members that die. So I think it's important to state that deterrence is violence. It's not deterrence. It doesn't deter anybody, like the film said. It kills people, and we know it, and our government just keeps letting it happen.
Thank you for sharing that, Jenn. I'm going to go to the question from the audience. I think Eva might be the most well-positioned person to answer this. One of our audience members, Elsa, is curious about whether the issue of retaliation has come up, and if Arivaca organizers and No More Death volunteers have experienced retaliation due to their organizing, humanitarian work, and the public criticisms of Border Patrol.
Well, during the Trump administration, there was definitely a lot more, I would say, state repression against people who were solidarity activists with migrants, which is, you know, just the classic sort of, as authoritarian policies become more so, you start to go after the people who are, it's like part of dehumanizing an entire group of people is going after the people who are in solidarity with those people. So there certainly was, and maybe this audience member, I don't know, may have heard of like the cases against No More Deaths. There's the camp, which you see briefly in the film, which is based in Arivaca, was raided 4 times during the 4 years of the Trump administration in military style raids where dozens of people receiving humanitarian care and medical care were arrested. And there was the case of Scott Warren, who was specifically targeted because of a report documenting Border Patrol abuse that No More Deaths released. And he was a volunteer in Ajo. He's also in the film. And he was arrested and faced 2 felony trials because the first trial was a hung jury and the second time he was acquitted, but just on these trumped up charges basically for providing aid to people. So there definitely has been, and I know like Mitra could probably talk more, like in San Diego, there was like really bad repression against solidarity activists at the border and stuff. But I mean, I think always that's just like the escalation, right? Of, what I said at the beginning, it's the further dehumanization.
Thank you. Mitra, I'm sure you have a lot to share on this, but what are the biggest problems you see with these agencies?
There's no accountability or transparency. We use those words a lot, and so it's easy again to sort of, they become meaningless. So what do I mean? In terms of accountability, you know, across the board, both internally in the agency and externally in terms of our judicial system, there have been obstacle after obstacle after obstacle erected to make sure that people who commit misconduct, including things like excessive use of force, racial profiling, and other serious violations of basic human and constitutional rights, are insulated from any meaningful accountability for those actions. Agents don't, they rarely lose their jobs. Almost never are they prosecuted criminally for anything. So Scott Warren, the prosecutors chose to retry him. That was a prosecutorial choice after the first jury came back hung. And meanwhile, no one is being prosecuted within the Border Patrol, for instance, for misconduct. It's extremely rare. And then on the judicial side of things, we have a Supreme Court that has effectively eliminated the Bivens cause of action for damages for violations of your constitutional rights by federal agents. We have the doctrine of qualified immunity, which gives police a lot of opportunity to evade any meaningful judicial review. So that's accountability. Transparency, it's a black box. So to give you one very concrete example, as horrific as ICE detention is, as horrific as immigration detention is, ICE has what's called a detainee locator system, which means that if you have someone's basic personal information or a number, you can find them within ICE detention, or you should be able to find them. There is no analog for CBP or Border Patrol detention. So when people are disappeared into Border Patrol or CBP detention, they are literally disappeared. You cannot find them. They can't be, the families don't know where they are. If they're among the few immigrants who have access to counsel, their attorneys can't find them. And that's just one example. So I really could talk about that for forever. So I'll stop. But there's a lot. And one resource that I'll put in the chat is holdcbpaccountable.org, which is a website that collects lawsuits and complaints about CBP misconduct across a variety of different topics that folks can go to and look and see all of the harms and then think about, okay, each of these needs a solution. Although I tend to agree with Yvette's view that the solution is to shut it down.
Thank you for sharing that. That's one of the things that we heard about in the film, right? Was the whistleblower talking about how he consistently saw any issues of excessive use of force raised had no repercussions, no write-ups, no consequences to the officers, which just sort of promotes this impunity amongst the officers. I want to move on to resistance and fighting back because I want to be respectful of everybody's time and want to make sure that if anybody has any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat now. Eva, are you working on any projects right now?
Like a film projects? Maybe, but I'm not. It's very early days.
Okay, that sounds promising.
Yeah.
Please keep us updated.
But I will say that I'm still involved with People Helping People, and People Helping People is still very active in Arivaca, and still organizing to support the community, giving humanitarian aid and resisting militarization. So that project is always ongoing.
What changes do you hope will come out of this film?
Well, I'm not very hopeful, but I think that ideally this film can be an educational tool that inspires more people to get involved in the struggle, inspires more sort of understanding at a larger scale about how militarization functions. I think that the immigrant rights movement in this country is really strong. And I think that there needs to be like synthesis between that and the the demilitarization movement. And there needs to be, so that there's not compromise. I think, often we get these sort of immigration reforms that come with a price tag of a lot of money for further militarizing the border. And I think if more people can sort of have that analysis of understanding how border militarization leads to further criminalization, and so that these things go hand in hand, that the movement can get stronger, and that the film can hopefully play a role in helping create that analysis and synthesis across movements, and hopefully, you know, contribute to a growing movement for change and, like Yvette and Mitra said, abolition of these oppressive systems.
Thank you. Jorge, this question is for you. What are some ways you have fought to change the current militarized approach to the border?
Just trying to empower communities. I think the film does a good job of showing what the power of, um, of community, what that can do in regards to like social change. But when you talk about accountability and holding people accountable or like oversight, I think the best way to do it is to empower the people who live the experiences day in, day out. If people just know their experiences, if they know their rights so that they can share their experiences, because that brings awareness of what's happening in the border. Because I think the reality is that most people don't really know what the border is, what the southern border even consists of, what that even means. People just think it's a line, but the reality, I think, throughout the years and decades, Congress, the courts have created this place of exception that's literally like a laboratory for civil rights abuses. And then we see how this agency, which is, I think the film talked about it, one of the largest agencies in the world, or at least in the US, right? How they can exert this power with impunity on everybody, right? You don't have to be an immigrant or a migrant. We saw how the Border Patrol's role, like in Portland, in the BLN movement, right? So what we need to do is just, if you have the ability, know your rights and just bring awareness to the border region.
Thank you. Jenn, you've publicly said that militarization and enforcement only policies don't make us safer. Despite what politicians say, in fact, they lead to more violence, corruption, and death. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you think would be a better approach?
Well, I mean, I think that when we talk about the U.S. Border Patrol and impunity, and we wonder how that happens, I think we have to recognize the Border Patrol maintains at least 3 different types of units in every sector that investigate every use of force that they do. They're normally called critical incident teams, but there's a variety of different names for them. And the Border Patrol is illegally investigating. The Anastacio Hernández Rojas case of 2010 is a really good example of that, where they beat this man to death because he asked to have medical attention, because he did not want to go back to Mexico, and without seeing a doctor, because they damaged his leg. And what they clearly did in that case, and it was documented by the San Diego PD, is they clearly use their connections with local law enforcement to influence the investigation, to get rid of evidence. And these teams are exactly why the Border Patrol is never held accountable. I think one of the things about Title 42 getting to today, these teams still exist, but today, one of the reasons why we're seeing such death along the border is the Title 42. You cannot have national security without having an asylum system. If you can't bring people in to have asylum, people will not be deterred into going out into the vast areas, and it just increases death. And we know that happens. And so whether it's Border Patrol impunity or CBP impunity, lack of accountability, or these different deterrence policies, it's just constant death and brutalization to everybody who lives down here on the border or comes into contact with these agents.
Thank you, Jenn. We know that when Border Patrol was created in 1924, in the times before that, migrants were making the trek across the border, that the North American Free Trade Agreement significantly affected that when it came into effect in 1994. And enforcement really ramped up through things like Operation Blockade and Hold the Line, where now we have a humanitarian crisis with just a crazy growing number of deaths along the border. Today, with policies like Title 42 and MPP, Mitra, I wanted to ask, what is the human toll of these policies?
I mean, it's just tremendous, and it's so large and so staggering that I think it is actually very hard for people to fully wrap their heads around it. For example, Human Rights Watch, I believe, has put out a report that has documented 6,300 instances of murder, rape, or other attacks on migrants who have been subject to MPP or other asylum turnback policies just in the last few months. And those are only the stories we know about. I think that I think it's fair to presume that for each one of those narratives that sees the light of day, there are many others that don't, because of lack of access to resources, because of lack of access to advocates, because of the lack of a safe space to tell one's story. And so, it's a staggering human impact. And we live in an era of climate instability, and these movements of people will only accelerate. People will continue to seek safety and security, as is their right as human beings. And I think that it is incumbent upon all of us to insist on a modernized, humane set of policies that recognizes people's humanity rather than doubles down on like a military industrial approach to borders.
Thank you. Yvette, in the film, it was explained that the jurisdiction of the US Border Patrol reaches 100 miles in the interior of the country from any border or coast. This was established in 1953 by the Department of Justice. What are some of the issues with this, and why is this problematic?
This was already mentioned by Jorge earlier, but the 100-mile jurisdiction becomes very silly as it's defined, especially if you think about how Border Patrol was meant to be at the actual, I don't know what Border Patrol was supposed to be originally, but
what kind of rights violations does this encourage?
What kind of rights violations
does having a 100-mile zone encourage?
Oh, it encourages the kind of rogue policing that Border Patrol engages in against non-citizens, and allows for them to also deploy it against citizens. And I say that because US citizens should be aware of how Border Patrol is encroaching into interior law enforcement in a way that's completely inappropriate and diverts from what its alleged mission is, to the point where, as what I mentioned earlier, we have CBP presence policing protesters in Portland, which, like, they have people have a First Amendment right to protest, and agents from DHS, potentially Border Patrol or potentially Homeland Security investigations, were kidnapping people in unmarked white vans, which I think people associate with dictatorships in Latin America, but happened in Portland last summer. And I kind of don't like talking about this because I feel like people should care about this regardless of who's being policed, like if they're documented or not. But it is a truth that Border Patrol's scope in terms of who it targets and what things it's allowed to police has only increased, to the point where now lines are completely blurred and they're involved in domestic policing of US citizens. And, as we saw in the film, Border Patrol is just one of the roughest, most violent law enforcement agencies. And so these aren't issues that are just limited to the US-Mexico border. I mean, because of the way that they've defined their 100-mile jurisdiction, they're interpreting their scope as being national, which it should not be at all.
Thank you. Given that we talked a little bit about the exponential growth in power of Border Patrol and just DHS as an agency that also encompasses ICE. In the film, it was mentioned that the 100-mile zone could expand to 200 miles. And we've seen Border Patrol act in places like Portland around as a response to the Black Lives Matter protests. Mitra, and I'm gonna try to ask you to hold it for like 30 seconds or a minute. Are there ways in which Border Patrol could continue to expand its power and authority in ways we have not anticipated?
The short answer is yes, but also that the Constitution is the supreme law of the United States and this agency is not above that law. And so, there are statutes that provide DHS enforcement agencies, including ICE and CBP, including the Border Patrol, with certain police authorities. Those statutes have to be consistent with the Constitution because the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And so I think that there are opportunities and responsibilities for concerned people to push back hard on that proliferation of agency authority. But the agency has shown time and time again that it will try to grab as much power as it can. And so we can't sleep on that, is the short answer.
Thank you. If there are any questions that we didn't get to, if our participants and audience could include their email, and we will make sure to do our best to respond to them after the panel. I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to get to our ask. The ACLU of New Mexico, the ACLU of San Diego and Imperial counties, and the ACLU of Arizona have joined with the ACLU of Texas and ACLU National to launch a border humanity project. It's aimed at restoring asylum and limiting detention and pushing for a more humane approach at the border. We are launching this campaign in early November. With a week of action that's going to follow. If you have not signed up for our emails, please visit our website and get signed up so that you will receive information on the week of action and other events. If you are joining us from Arizona, please visit the ACLU, the ACLU Arizona website. And if you're joining from California, please visit the ACLU of San Diego. We will include the links in the chat as well. But that is the best way to stay connected to our work and ensure that we can continue to fight this together, because coalition and community building is going to be the one way that we can push back on these very systemic, very large problems in our society. I want to close with this question. What can, and anybody can take it, what can border communities leverage to push back on Border Patrol as our closing thought? Anyone can take this question. Thank you.
I mean, I just think that knowledge is power. And I think that the more we know about the realities that are experienced in our border communities, and the more we can deepen that awareness throughout our communities and empower people to feel like they too are expert in these trends and patterns, that's step one. And then coming together and bridging movements. So I think that there are divides between border justice advocates and immigrants' rights movement folks, and there are divides between border justice advocates and police accountability and racial justice advocates. And we need to do the work of showing how this struggle is one struggle, and it's just different permutations of the same injustices over and over again. And then we need to think creatively without ego about how we can come together to demand a different world. Simple, right? Easy.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to thank everybody for spending an hour with us today. I want to thank our partners across affiliates and at the UNM School of Law for being here today. Thank you for your time. Continue to grow your knowledge, and please sign up for our email notifications so that you can stay connected to the work. Have a great day.